The constant oil bunkering going on in the Niger Delta region of the country has not stopped Nigeria from being one of the main producers of oil in Africa. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, says Nigeria's crude oil production increased to 1.18 million barrels per day in July 2022. A closer look at the September required production showed that amongst African producers, Nigeria ranked the highest, while Sudan was at the bottom. However, for months, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPCL, has not been able to remit a kobo to the Federation account, and the company blamed the extant subsidy payment regime as well as the massive ongoing oil theft in the Niger Delta region. In addition, Nigeria has fingered years of declining upstream investment, inability to restart oil wells shut in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic in 2022 as outright sabotage by oil-producing communities for its lack of capacity to raise production. So as we look forward to the growth of our economy and how we can increase production output, joining us now on the show as we discuss how to increase our oil production in Nigeria is Engineer Dennis Nnamdi Ajulu, former Group Executive Director, Refineries and Technologies of the NNPC. Great to have you, sir. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for your time. I'd like to ask, why is it that we have a big problem with refineries and refining? Why is it that till date we cannot refine, we cannot churn out our own, crude oil derivatives and products, and we still have to import? Why, sir?
Well, thank you for having me here. It's a long, long way of occurrence. It's being a gradual process of coming down in capacity to produce, but in terms of the human capacity, the production facility, and the overall management from the government to the corporate and all that. So it's being a full integrated problem and a process of gradual decline in the commitment to have those facilities produce. And so the aggregate and the outcome of that is what we are seeing today, that we're not producing.
Okay, let me ask you very quickly. We've been discussing crude oil theft, and someone had expressed the view, both on and off the camera. Now the problem is really not crude oil theft, that is leadership, and excessive politics in the hydrocarbon industry. You were in that hydrocarbon industry. What kind of excessive politics goes on? Not government now, but within the industry itself. If you could tell us about that.
Okay, it's a very complex thing to, in one very simple language, to present and then give us solutions to that kind of problem. But what I would like us to see from the perspective of dealing with leadership, how do the people respond to things going well or not going well? I wanted to see the fact that when we are taking decisions, it's important to analyze the impact those decisions will have, the outcome of the impact. So, and typically what you do is decision impact analysis before a decision is taken. And so you project and say, what would be the negative impacts of such decisions? And then when we are doing also feedback to analyze results, we look at results. If results are coming out that are not in line with our expectation, we go back to say, these results are not good. And we do a feedback and we analyze to see, where are we going wrong? Where have we gone wrong? Is it that we did not take the right decisions, or that the results of our decisions do not match what? So in other words, there's a boundary between the decisions we take and the outcome. So in that segment of what we put out as the work we do, is it that the team is not working well? Is it that error has occurred that we did not quite foresee? And so all of it comes down and boils down to analyzing human behavior. And the critical ingredient in these things is the human being. If the human being has more of the destructive impulse playing out, we are likely to have that. If we have the creative impulse playing out, then, of course, destructive impact results in outcomes that nobody likes to see, which is what we are saying. And so from all of the country and the way we are going, we find out that in this country, at one time, we had to provide the peacekeeping force in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. In this country, we produced the highest jurist at the World Court, that's Professor Teslim Elias. And then in this country, we produced Dr. Adeoyo Lambo. And so we have had very erudite people and across the boundaries of our national life. In the refineries also, we have had very outstanding people who have worked. But you ask yourself, why is it that all of a sudden there's this outcome of huge, huge losses? How do we address that? It's not going to be just one person coming out to say, this is the solution. But we need to look at ourselves again. We need to look at what are the things we derive value from. Where has merit gone in our country? Do we have a culture of merit? Or do we have a culture of patting failure on the back and saying, okay, it go good, it's going to be okay? No. And so the challenge I have here is that in the course of me, for instance, growing up, we learned the things we have learned from fundamental knowledge. Those we met in the system, very erudite people in the oil industry. I may not go into naming them, but they were good and good. But today, you want to be also in a position to say, these are very, very erudite persons who are there in the saddle managing. So merit and the culture of merit, we should be in a position to say, we still have merit. We still have a culture of merit in the sense of the value we project, the value we derive, and the output and the outcomes that we see. But I'm sure that the outcomes we see do not complement in any way what we'd ordinarily have loved to see. And so my challenge there is that let us tell ourselves in the face, there's failure. And if there's failure, how do we address this failure? So for me, that's the positioning first. How do we address the failure and what is occurring as failure currently?
So recently there was a turnaround maintenance approved. So are we saying that our own engineers that are on ground now in the NNPC cannot do that time themselves? That we have to call people in? And we've been doing turnaround maintenance all this while. We've not produced enough oil to be able to service our local economy. Is that what we are saying now?
The turnaround maintenance in terms of content and what you want to achieve. When the refineries were new at the onset, the refineries in themselves could carry on turnaround maintenance by the staff themselves. Because in terms of content of scope, the scope was limited. In terms of content of people, you also had very competent people. And you had an enlarged group of people who could also deliver. But then with equipment and facilities generally, as these facilities age, there's more demand on the work to be done. It becomes much more intricate, much more complex. But you want to be in a position also to define rightly and correctly the level of work that needs to be done at the turnaround. And then when that is properly defined, then you have the right funding and the management approach to achieve the right outcomes. So what has happened over time is that in terms of decision assessment and analysis, we have had to be taking decisions that may not match quite the outcomes we are looking at. And so we have had a mismatch in those areas. And then in terms of funding, when the refinery started at the onset, the refineries Warri, Kaduna were as a response to shortages in petroleum product supplies. And so there were response that were, in a sense, quick to bring a result, to mitigate those shortages. And by the reason of that, those refineries were established as import substitution industrialization projects, not necessarily as export-oriented industrialization. And what that resulted in was that the products, which were subsidized highly, could not quite make up for the forex to bring in the level of repairs and equipment that would require running into the years. And so gradually, we found that funding constraints began to have effect. Then capacity began to have effect. And eventually, turnaround maintenance had to be contracted to third parties. And we were achieving fairly good results. But it got to a point where funding constraints, the interests that were intermediate in a sense, not the ordinate and highly impactful outcomes that we would like to have, started playing and having their play. And the composite effect today is that the refineries are not in the best condition. Not that they are out, that they cannot produce or outrightly, but we have taken decisions that we needed not to have taken in terms of putting them out of operation. And we have not taken decisions that we should have had to take early enough to begin to address the issues that will bring us to the right kind of outcomes. Those are collectively the things that have put us to where we are today.
Well, the state authorities have been feeding us with a lot of optimism. We're told that the refineries will be ready, fully operational by middle of next year. And then a lot of optimism also about the Dangote refinery that is supposed to come on stream. And now we have the 2023 budget with a projection of 1.69 million barrels per day. Is there really a true basis for optimism, particularly when you place that again against the crude oil theft matter that we've been discussing this morning?
We have obviously a problem. And one of the challenges we have in the way we tackle some of this problem is that we have not brought the most effective ways of dealing with the problems as we should. And so my challenge here is that, yes, I'm also sharing, and I would like to share in the optimism as a person. But as much as I do, in principle, but then is the reality of that optimism, okay, is it going to come to be as we expect it to be? So what we need to do now is we need to have a steering advisory committee to advise the management at the top. If you go to education board, there's a board that advises on education, the Education Council. You go to the police, you have the Police Service Commission. You have had, for example, if I read correctly, I saw the one-time Inspector General of Police who was the chairman. I think it's a Muslim spit. And that was a hindrance at one time. So we find that in terms of knowledge and understanding of the problems, you need to bring together all of the integral of the knowledge that we have achieved and aggregated over the years, so that it's not just one person who comes and says, makes a policy, because the person, by knowledge and extent of scope and understanding, is very, very likely to be limited. So we need to have, at the top level, a steering advisory committee. We need to have a technical and operations advisory committee. We need to have a finance and economic advisory committee, and then human resource development advice, so that the organization is assisted in the way of projecting to the future to deal with challenges. What kind of challenge, how were these challenges tackled in the past? And tracking those problems, how are we to be more and better positioned to tackle them, to have the right outcomes? And because what we're having today, some of the experiences I've had are things we garnered from those who we met in the system. Very wonderful people. And those provided us with the basic blocks of learning, experience gaining. And that's why we achieved what we achieved as a team when we worked, because when we were there, the refineries were producing, and they produce well. And we can still do that again with the right posture and with the right attitude and the right content of what we bring as our inputs to solve these problems.
Well, thank you very much, Engineer Ajulu, for joining us on the morning show today. Thank you very much indeed for your insights.